Some of the folks on the Hangar One TV show, which airs on the History Channel, are with us here today. And I'm sure they'd be happy to give you their autograph. But aside from being TV personalities, like their colleague Norman Gagnon, they also have been involved with some very, very strange and interesting cases. In fact, like Norm, they are also STAR team investigators. Ben is Chief Field Investigator for Virginia MUFON, and Tony is Assistant State Director for Virginia MUFON. And again, you've seen these guys on TV if you watch the History Channel at all, because the History Channel keeps playing these things over and over and over and over. And I said, gotta look at Ben's face again. I mean, come on. It's on TV all the time. We're very grateful that they're coming here today, and even though they've been involved with some really interesting recent cases, as Norm has, they're actually here talking about a historical case, the classic case of the Socorro, New Mexico incident of 1964. Is Don Berliner in the room, perchance? Well, some of you may be familiar with Don Berliner. He's sort of like one of the godfathers, I guess, of ufology. And Don spoke at a previous conference. Don's certainly one of the most knowledgeable people ever, of all time, when it comes to UFOs. And Don once described the Socorro case as perhaps the most compelling and interesting and convincing case that he's ever come across. It happened in New Mexico in 1964, involved a highly respected police officer, Lonnie Zabora. Oh, there he is. So Ben and Tony have done some investigative work, and they're going to update us on recent information and discoveries that they have gleaned from investigating this classic case. So please welcome TV personalities Ben Moss and Tony Angola.
Peter was close, it's Angiola, but no. So welcome everybody, good morning. This is early for me. I'm an IT guy, so that means I don't get to bed until 2 a.m. And so this morning I experimented with coffee. I did 4 shots of espresso. That's why I'm walking right now. If you've ever been to a wedding where the ring bearer forgets the ring, that was me today about 10 minutes ago, because I thought this presentation wasn't on my computer. And I found it in the trash because we had an update. We were working on this last night. We put about 20 hours into this thing, and I threw it in the trash thinking that I had the new version. But anyways, we're only missing 1 slide. So anyways, a big thank you to Peter Resta for having us out. We're really excited about this and getting this information out to you. How many people are here familiar with Socorro, New Mexico? Show of hands. Awesome. This is great. Okay, well, those of you who are not familiar, we're going to give you a quick crash course in the first slide with a little 3-minute movie by James Fox. If you might be familiar with his 701 film and I Know What I Saw. He did a really good job on this little short. Also, we have some new evidence for those of you who are familiar with the case that's we're really excited about showing you. Now, Ben and I have spent about 150 hours now working with Ray Stanford, who was one of the lead investigators next to J. Allen Hynek on this case. And we're going to take you through the evidence and some of the inaccuracies that was perpetuated in the media, and hopefully, give you some more insight on that. For those of you who don't know who Ray was, he goes back to the beginning of ufology, so he's been around from the very beginning. He knew George Adamski, he knew J. Allen Hynek, personal friends with all these people. So it's funny because whenever we go through these old books and we have a question about that, we call him up and he says, I knew that guy. Let me tell you something about that. So we have firsthand knowledge. Ray's now 77 years old, and he just knew every single person out there. So and everyone knows who J. Allen Hynek is, right? He's the Air Force expert that was sent out. We're going to want to be able to be talking about that, yeah. So let me just get started with this here. And I forgot this button here. And start from here. Okay, great. How about if I do that? Oh. Okay, great. Let me hit that, and where's the AV? Let me just restart this then. How about that?
We were warned that it might be technical difficulty.
Okay. There we go. So here's a little short film.
police officer, Lonnie Zamora, in Socorro, New Mexico. He was following a speeder. As he was following the speeder, he saw off to his right in the southwest, he saw a brilliant kind of a blue-white flame. It looked like it might be dropping down or descending. He didn't understand it, so he dutifully left the speeder and turned to the southwest up a hill.
When I got up on top of the mesa there, I looked down and I seen this big white object on the ground. I could see some figures.
Lonnie told him that he had seen some small beings that looked like children around the craft.
They were no taller than maybe 2.5, 3 feet tall.
He never wandered more than about 3 feet away from his patrol car when the craft took off. He just could not compute at that moment what this thing was, other than it was raising vertically straight up.
And at that time, nobody knew what a UFO was. That's when they started putting it on the papers.
The unusual size of the occupants. I knew that the government, nobody else hires midgets to fly ultra-secret Black Project craft.
There were 2 sets of footprints. I saw them with my own eyes. That's about the size of them. It happened right here. And I was here 15 minutes after, and I saw the smoldering, I saw the footprints, and I saw the imprints of the unit.
The behavior of the technology, the way it rose up on this mysterious ground-knocking flame, the way it flew off horizontally without a sound, at least as far as Zamora could hear, the way it climbed to beyond supersonic speed, all of these things suggest that it was by no means a 1964 technology, and in fact, there's nothing today that could duplicate that technology. This is the best documented close encounter of the third kind that has ever been.
And with that, here's Ben Moss.
Okay, this is a significant case because it's one of the few that Project Blue Book could not determine what happened. It's an unknown. They tried their best to dispel, to find a reason for it. This is the Project Blue Book team. That's Hector Quintanilla right there. He's the head of it. Notice a little alien in the ashtray. Mr. Morano is here. This is Duty Officer Harold T. Jones and Secretary Marilyn Stanscombe. The reason I'm bringing this up is this is the investigated arm of the Air Force that investigated UFOs, and people think it was a big group. This is it. This is basically the group. Started with Project Sign in 1947. That morphed into Project Grudge. That's kind of an inside joke, I think, the Grudge name. That became Project Blue Book. And then the Condon Report out of the University of Colorado, which was predetermined, supposed to study UFOs, predetermined they didn't exist. So when that came out, a big waste of $500,000 by the taxpayers, and they said there was nothing to it. That was the end of Project Blue Book in 1969. This is a picture actually from the site where the craft, they have a Geiger counter. That's Mr. Zamora. That's an FBI agent, and I believe this is Lieutenant Holder from a couple of Air Force officers. So the craft flies over Socorro, New Mexico. It's seen by a lot of people. Lonnie Zamora was on random patrol. So one of the hoaxes was that a bunch of college students set this up. There's no way they were going to know where Lonnie Zamora was. He was on random patrol. And a speeder went by him. As he's chasing the speeder, he sees an object in the sky and decides to follow that, thinking perhaps that maybe a plane was coming down. So he abandons the speeder to follow the path of the object. Off this main highway, you get onto what's not really a road. And he goes off to the right, thinking that a plane was there, and crests. It takes him 3 tries to get up to the top of this hill, crests this hill, and then stops the car. He looks out, he sees a white egg-shaped object, thinking it's a car turned over when he first gets there. But once he starts looking a little bit closer, he notices that he called them two white coveralls. So he saw two creatures, he never said humans, in white coveralls standing next to the craft. And basically what happened was he was, one of the beings seemed to be startled when it saw him and jumped. And then he turned his direction, he looked away. When he looked back, the creatures weren't there. Got back in his car, and the craft with a big roar started to lift off with a blue flame. And he was fearing an explosion, so he hit the dirt in a prone position from his old Army training. At 30 feet or so, the main engine stops. It seems like there's an oscillation. Apparently another engine kicked in and the craft went silent. And we have a little bit of a reenactment for that. So it basically went along the desert there and then started rising out of sight. But Sergeant Chavez, one of his fellow officers, showed up and probably saw this thing going off in the distance. He admitted it to his fellow policemen, but he would never talk about it because he saw the way that Lonnie Zamora was treated by the Air Force. So this is a pretty good drawing of Lonnie trying to crest this hill. The object's over here. Lonnie's driving on, it's not a road, so it took him 3 tries to get up to the top of this hill. This is a really good shot. There's Lonnie in the background. Here's the creatures. The guy did a good job with this drawing because they look like they're startled. And that's pretty much the size of a 10-year-old children. As Ray said, we don't know any programs that used small people to fly aircraft. It had 4 landing struts, a doorway possibly. And then Lonnie hit the dirt. Now, we're going to talk about this symbol. This, we believe, is the real symbol. There's multiple symbols out there for that.
Okay, now, don't have a heart attack, but we worked really hard at getting a sound that sounded a lot like the craft taking off, and then this oscillating second engine that kicks in. So imagine being right in front of that happening.
So then it goes silent. So Lonnie Zamora, a little bit about Lonnie Zamora. Lonnie was a police officer retired from the Army. His credibility was unquestioned. Even Dr. Hynek said that he didn't think this guy made this up. All it did was cause him a lot of grief. He wasn't a believer in UFOs. He never changed his story to the day he died. As I said, Hynek stated that he was very detail-oriented. That's why there's a lot of information about this sighting that didn't last maybe more than 2 or 3 minutes. When the people came, when the other officers showed up, he was pale and trembling like something really bad had happened, and they'd never seen him so freaked out. He wasn't a drinker. Now the evidence, there's a lot of evidence. This is one of the burned bushes. That's Lonnie in plain clothes. That's Sergeant Chavez. That's Ray Stanford as a young man with a little Elvis bouffant there.
It wasn't style back then.
It wasn't style. He keeps reminding us of that. So there's a rock with some metal we'll talk about. There's some scorched paper. There's the indentations of the 4 landing struts. There's the irradiated film. And the film is interesting because Lieutenant Captain Ted Jordan showed up about 15 minutes after this event with an Argus C3 camera, 35 millimeter, and took some pictures right after the event. And those pictures, it turned out, were never released back to him, but we found out from Dr. Hynek later that it's because they were fogged as if by radiation. And a little bit about that. Basically, radiation, I'll read a little something here because it's hard for me to remember this part. So Chavez was first to the site, followed by State Senior Patrolman Ted Jordan. Arrived with an Argus C3 camera with a light meter and 35 millimeter color slide Kodachrome film. Proceeded to take pictures of the site. Chavez took Polaroids the following morning. The Polaroids the next day turned out. the film taken on the day of did not. It was apparently fogged by radiation. When the military came to investigate, they borrowed Ted Jordan's film, never to return it to him. 4 months later, when he asked for it back, Hynek told Zamora that the film was fogged due to radiation, and that's why the film was never returned, because the Air Force did not want anybody to know that the film had been fogged by radiation. Now, fogging the film is a commonly used in film badge dosimetry, where workers around irradiated materials use strips of film to measure exposure. Some of these badges have that. So exposure to film of radiation will show up on the film, and then you know you're probably going to see your bones through your hand or something. This leads to the fact that the blue flame that Lonnie saw, which knifed into the ground, was probably, the theories are maybe subatomic particles were being discharged at a relativistic velocity. But the radiation was gone the next day. And Don Burleson did a really good paper on this in the MUFON Journal. So the half-life, which is the decay of radioactive material, all the material we know of, nuclear material, it takes hundreds or thousands of years for to decay. Whatever this was, it decayed in 2 to 6 hours. There's nothing on Earth that we know of that decays that quickly. So this is probably evidence of some advanced propulsion which enabled pictures to be fogged the first day, not the second day. And because this flame knifed into the ground, it wasn't like a jet. It didn't blow material around. It knifed into the ground, probably irradiated a very small area, and that's where they were standing when they took these pictures. So here we have the rock. And this is further evidence that pretty much shows you this was not any type of prank or hoax. This top picture, these are actual photos. Here's the shards of metal. This rock was found by, when Lonnie, Ray, and Dr. Hynek were on site, Lonnie spotted this rock right where one of the struts had hit, and it had broken a rock in half. Upon looking down, there were pieces of metal in it, and what's interesting, and Dr. Hynek, in a video that we can't release yet, Ray and Dr. Hynek talking about this, Dr. Hynek looked down and said that might be something, and Ray looked down and saw it, and then he kind of started talking about something else. Really weird behavior, but Dr. Hynek did things like this, which, as an investigator, I would have grabbed it right away, but so Ray realized what it was. So Ray kind of diverted their attention. He said, Dr. Hynek, you know, you got to be back at the police station for your conference with the news people and with the military around. So he pretty much started talking about something else. They all got in their cars, drove to the conference, which Ray said was blessedly short, and then he got in his car, drove back, picked up the rock, and that's why we have the rock. This is the rock before he sent it to Goddard. There are these metal shards in there that the strut, the 4 struts, when it hit this rock, and this thing was heavy because it pushed the ground up, we'll show you some pictures of that, but it scraped the rock, and these metal shards were the most important part of that. This was taken by us maybe a couple of months ago at Ray's house. These black arrows show you where the metal shards were. Ray got the rock back with no metal shards in it, and they said there was nothing to it. But the person at Goddard said he would investigate it. If it was anomalous, they would do a paper, they would expose it, they would say that this was off-world material. That never happened. The gentleman that Ray was talking to stopped talking to him. He found out later that the last part of this analysis, the paper that broke down this metal, they could never release to the public because of what they found. So we have the rock, we're looking at other evidence in here, and there was a rock underneath where the blue flame came out that actually melted crystals in the rock, and the Air Force never gave that back. So, you know, there's a lot of evidence in this case, a lot of evidence that people don't know about. This is actually one of the indentations. This shows you how heavy this thing was. It was a wedge-shaped, 4 landing pads, 4 struts. It pushed the dirt up around it. Could have possibly, this is an actual photo from the site, could have possibly weighed several tons. The 4 indentations were symmetrical, not evenly spaced apart because this is an egg-shaped craft, but in a way that this would balance the craft. This is actually an affidavit signed by Lonnie Zamora. What it says is, I, Lonnie Zamora, hereby state that on Wednesday, April 29th, in the presence of Dr. Hynek and Sergeant Chavez and Ray Stanford, I pointed out to Hynek and Stanford a large stone at the edge of the northwest UFO footprint, that's what he called the landing gear pad's footprints, and stated that it appeared to have been shipped by the UFO foot, and he signed it. It just shows you how much there was to this case that people don't really realize. If you haven't read Ray's book, you should. We have some in the back, but it's the most definitive book on the case. There's this burned paper. This is a pretty cool 3D rendition, and here's the craft with the symbol, the 4 struts. I don't believe this was there at the time. None of this was there at the time, but this wasn't far off the highway, but here's the area it landed in. And it's a pretty good rendition. Egg-shaped craft, 4 landing struts, 2 beams standing next to it. What's interesting is next to the craft were indentations of 2 circles where it looks like a ladder was down, and then when they came down the ladder, it kind of reset. So there are 2 different prints of the ladder bottom, and then footprints, very tiny footprints around it. This paper, now we're not sure if this is actually from the event. The paper was really old. It wasn't paper, it wasn't from any type of pyrotechnics. This is paper that had been weathered, was sitting in this area. There was a lot of paper around this area because it was a gully and wind just blows things. You have this weird concentric circle here, which is a little bit odd. We're not sure if this is actually from the propulsion system. It could be, but it might be another piece of evidence. All right, some of the hoaxes, and there are a lot of hoax claims. One was these college students either created a balloon or flew this is a weather balloon. I'm not even sure if this was around in '64 when this event occurred. This might have been '67. It does have 4 ends on it. It is white and egg shaped. It's certainly not going to make any indentations in the ground. The thing about this case is when this event occurred on April 24th, 1964, the craft went up and flew into an 18 to 20 mile an hour wind that gusted to 40 miles an hour, flew against the wind. There's no balloon in the world that I know of in '64 that could do that. This is the other hoax claim, a landing of a moon lander by a Hughes aircraft. This lander looks like a lander. It's got round struts. In '64, the moon lander had no internal engine. White Sands is near here, and this is where they tested this, but there's no reason in the world why they would have this moon lander in Socorro off the White Sands area. One of the hoax claims is this was held by a cable from a Bell helicopter and flown over the area, but with 11 witnesses to this case, nobody saw a helicopter. Also, at this time, the only thing they were doing with this was dropping it from a cable onto the ground to see how well the landing struts would handle the landing. But in '64, this thing did not have an internal engine. There's no reason in the world, and this doesn't look off-world, it looks strange, but you know, people were talking about the moon landing, and this was not a big secret at the time. So I think these hoaxes are easily dismissed by the evidence we're showing. Now the symbol is really interesting. The symbols, this was one of Lonnie Zamora's first drawing, and we're going to get into that. This is Hynek's sketch from the National Archives. This is the decoy that the Air Force made Lonnie draw. This is what Lonnie really saw. Now what's interesting is when I Googled, I was talking to Ray about the meaning of this symbol, and he was coming up with various explanations for it. And I Googled radiation symbols, and I got this. What's interesting is you have 3 bars and an inverted V. You have V's and 3 symbols. V-shaped, 3 symbols, 3 symbols, 3 symbols. Red is a universal color for warning, heat, fire. So red is a color associated with something painful. This symbol could mean, and this was on the center of the craft, this symbol could mean, and Ray agrees with what I thought of this V shape, inverted V, locates the center thruster. The 3 bars represent radiation or some type of energy. And what this might mean is, don't stand here, or something bad's going to happen. This is probably a fairly plausible explanation for the symbol. There's been a lot of other symbols, and when Lonnie would draw the symbol for his fellow officers, he would draw this and crumple it up. He was told to use this one because the reason was if the Air Force had other reports of this object and somebody drew that symbol, they knew they were making it up. If somebody drew the symbol that wasn't released, well, then they probably saw the same craft. And what a lot of people don't know is several of the other officers saw this craft before and after this event, and they never talked about it because they saw the way Lonnie was treated by the Air Force and the FBI. A very credible person being told that he was drunk or ignorant. Here comes some audio. This audio is very telling. This is Walter Schroeder's radio interview the day after with Lonnie Zamora.
And someone said that the markings that you saw was an upside-down V with 3 lines running through it.
No, sir, I couldn't tell you that because they still don't want me to say nothing about markings.
They don't want you to say anything about the markings. All right, we won't question you on that. And if we run into an area that they don't want you to talk about, will you just say so?
So there you have it. Lonnie, you know, probably before he should have said anything, admitted that he wasn't supposed to talk about the markings. But Walter Schroeder knew that it was an inverted V with 3 bars through it, something that didn't come out until much later. This is further evidence that that is the real symbol. Now here's Ray. Ray's 77 now, but he actually went to the archives, the National Archives, and went in, and at first they weren't going to let him, nobody's supposed to touch any of this stuff. But when he was with James Fox, who did Out of the Blue and I Know What I Saw, when they realized that Ray was a person in these pictures and the lead investigator on the case, the only investigator that the FBI and the Air Force did not want Ray on site. And Dr. Hynek had become friends with Ray and said, no, you let him on site or I'm not going to be on site. So this is in Hynek's own letter. He was a PhD astronomer from Northwestern University. Here's what he drew. It's close, but he was a little spacey. We're not sure if he just didn't get it right, but it is 3 bars with an inverted V. And this is his actual drawing and letter that he said there was a thing called astropower, which we'll talk about, that the Air Force was really trying to figure out if it was another company symbol or a Hughes symbol. They really wanted to explain this case away as some type of black project. This is another company, astropower, that they were trying to say this is what this symbol was. But at the time, this company really was just trying to develop software. There was nothing flying, there was nothing that they had that, I mean, this thing was in its infancy, started in '61. They didn't have anything that could explain what Zamora saw. This isn't really close. It does have a, you know, an atomic symbol in the center, but it's an inverted V. Other than that, there's nothing, there's no craft associated with this symbol. We have internal, through luck on Craigslist, we actually had a state director who was able to buy original Blue Book memos that were never released to the public. And a lot of this is being seen for the first time. These are the internal memos by the Project Blue Book officers. This is kind of hard to read, and I have a better copy of it. Sergeant Chavez says that the Socorro policeman had told him that what's scratched out there is the first. There was a Madeira case. They thought was the second Socorro, but that was a hoax. It had red markings on its silvery side. It was called silvery because the white was almost a shining white of the craft. Chavez said the officer told him that the design was an inverted V with 3 bars through it, but that the Air Force had told him not to discuss the markings. This is internal memos showing that Zamora was told to lie about these markings. We want to drive that point home because there's a lot of misinformation about that. Something in white coveralls. We have an audio here that's a further part of this interview with Lonnie Zamora when Walter Schroeder asked him about the entities.
Do they have helmets on like spacemen or anything?
No, sir, I wouldn't say that there are people. I saw something white coveralls, that's what I could say.
It looks like there was something in white coveralls.
Right.
But you couldn't identify them as actually being a human being as you and I are.
No.
There were footprints there. We don't have anything where we put 2-foot tall people in spacecraft because they would be children. The Opal Grinder interview, we couldn't pull the actual audio, but basically what it says is Opal Grinder ran a gas station, and some people showed up as a gas station, 2 adults and 3 boys and 5 people in a car. And this is what Opal Grinder said in the live interview. Well, that tourist came up here, very definitely he came from the south, and he said, your aircraft around here flies awfully low. I said, well, how is that, sir? He said, well, it about knocked me off the road out there. He said it must have been in trouble, so a policeman was going to it. He saw Lonnie going towards this before the whole Lonnie Zamora incident happened. So I asked him if it was a helicopter. He said, no, it wasn't a funny looking one, or he might have said, if it was a funny looking one. So he went on about his fare, and I had to make it to the bank deposits for the bank. It was 15 to 6, 5:45, coincides very closely, and that was the same time he was here. Zamora gave a time of 5:50 for his encounter. So 5 minutes before Lonnie's encounter, you have 5 witnesses in a car. And the next morning, well, it dawned on me that the time that we met was the same time that the tourist was in here, and Zamora went to that object that was on the ground there. And he called the radio station telling them Zamora was not telling a lie because the tourist seen something and did something about it. And he saw the police officer going to the object that was on the ground, which was a UFO. And I want to add to that, when the event happened and Chavez and Hynek and Zamora went back to the police station, the dispatcher told them they had already had 3 calls from 3 independent people saying they had seen a blue light and something flying and this going towards the same area. So now we're up to 8 further witnesses for this event. This is an interesting letter from Dr. Alan Hynek, and he was basically told Ray that he would put something in his book about the incident. Now, Dr. Hynek worked for the Air Force until this case, basically. He was so tired of the Air Force saying, tell us swamp gas, tell him it's Venus and all, that this is probably one of the cases that pushed him over the edge. He was contracted by the Air Force, Project Blue Book at this time, but because of this case, this is probably about the time when he said, screw this, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to start my own organization, which he did, called CUFOS. So the key part of it is what he says right here. The Socorro UFO case is one of the classics in UFO history. In Ray's book, Socorro Saucer and a Pentagon Pantry, Ray Stanford not only tells the story well, but has brought it to a great deal of painstaking and intensive research, presenting a far more comprehensive and coherent treatment of this important case. Socorro case has always been a thorn in the side of UFO detractors who have tried to dismiss it, either as a deliberate attempt by the town fathers of Socorro to promote the tourist trade or as atmospheric phenomena. Ray Stanford has shown these attempts to be patently untenable. Stanford has transformed the case from a one-witness matter to a multi-witness case, and thus has accomplished what the Air Force failed to do. In the preparation of his book, Ray Stanford has exhibited a rare persistence in tracking down vital details of this remarkable and pivotal UFO sighting. His enthusiastic dedication and preoccupation with this case has been monumental. And what's interesting is Ray has was it an hour, 2-hour interview?
Yeah, about that.
A long interview with him and Dr. Hynek sitting on a bench where Dr. Hynek goes over every piece of the things we were showing you and says it's the truth. The film was radiated. The Air Force covered it up. Because Ray's not allowing us to release that yet, we have copies of it, but we can't show it. It's a gentleman's agreement, just like what we're going to show you at the end that we can't actually show you, but we can tell you about. Tony and I went on something that was on the front page of the MUFON Journal called The Search for the Lost Socorro Footage. We called NBC, CBS, Henry Dinkum Productions, all these companies that when you try to find old footage, and this is from the TV show Sightings, I kept getting pushed off. One person said, if I had it, well, you got to pay for it. I wasn't going to pay for it. I figured somebody somewhere had recorded this off of this 1990s TV show Sightings. Anybody see Sightings back in the day? It was an interesting show run by a former Air Force guy who was pretty much telling it like it is, wasn't talking about Little Green Men with X-Files background music. So we'll play this for you. We found this, John Ventry, the state director in Pennsylvania, after this long search and multiple articles go, well, I have that on VHS in my house. I'll send you a copy. Like, man, I should have called this guy in the first place.
Well, we were talking to him about it in California.
We were talking to him about it, and he
In the first place.
spaced out. So
here it is.
Here it is.
Socorro, New Mexico is the site of one of the most baffling UFO encounters in U.S. history. On April 24th, 1964, an unidentified craft reportedly landed and then ascended into the New Mexico twilight. On a recent episode of Sightings, we brought you the first-hand account of Sheriff's Deputy Lonnie Zamora, who witnessed the egg-shaped craft.
Those are the exact bushes that were there, and the craft was sitting right in between them two. So I started down to see what it was, and then I heard this big boom in the bottom, and then fire came off the bottom. So I started running behind my police car to take cover. And then it gradually pulled up about 20, 30 feet and stayed there for a while and then just took up.
Almost instantly, Socorro was the center of intense media interest. But except for the few frames of footage seen here, all film and photographs taken by news agencies and curious onlookers was reportedly confiscated by the government. But Sightings was recently contacted by a Southern California woman whose family home movies had somehow eluded the authorities.
Well, I was sitting home one night and the program Sightings came on, and there was a story about Socorro, New Mexico. And I sat up, I went, oh my God, I cannot believe it. I was there. I have home movies of this.
In April 1964, the family was on vacation in New Mexico. This rare home movie, recorded at the scene of Zamora's sighting, shows the aftermath of the UFO landing and takeoff.
As I recall, we stopped at a gas station, and I remember we spoke to a sheriff. And he told us that he had been in the desert and he saw a UFO landing. My father was really amazed about this and really interested. So we followed the sheriff out to the location where this occurred.
The scene of the UFO encounter was just as Lonnie Zamora has always described it.
I got out of the car and I walked, and you could see very clearly where it looked like a tripod had burned into the ground, or something, a craft had landed. And you could see the landing marks very clearly on the ground. That there was a bush that was all charred and burned.
Though short in duration, this film footage is significant because it not only validates Deputy Zamora's story, but also provides important documentation for ufologists who continue to study the Socorro case.
We were kind of quiet when we got back in the car, and I said, wow, Dad, that was amazing. It affected both of us. It was a remarkable thing to see, and we both believed what the sheriff told us. There was no question about it.
What's interesting is Ted Jordan, who was the person that took the photos the first day, said that this greasewood or creosote bush had been sliced in half as if burned by a knifing flame. So that's an interesting observation, that this thing pretty much where the center of this one engine knifed this bush in half. And something to be said about that, you know, when we go to Mars, we go to the moon, there's one engine that gets us there, there's another one that lands us, brings us back up. So this thing probably had a loud roaring blue flame that landed and took off, but when it got up in the air, that went silent. It might have still been working, or maybe some other propulsion engaged to enable this thing to silently go off into the distance, and then it took off at a steep angle. So we have some of the internal memos, some more of the Blue Book files. This is directly from, and it's funny because there's a lot of misspellings by these Air Force guys. Not to say anything bad about the Air Force.
No disrespect.
No disrespect. You know, he heard an explosion to the right of him, then he turned off, he forgot the word road, to investigate. I don't think that's spelled properly, but I guess the guy was writing really fast, but he saw what he thought to be an overturned car. And this is all internal. This wasn't released to the public. These are things that were found on Craigslist. And it turns out that the files, the Blue Book files, the original Blue Book files from this case, were on Craigslist, and they had come from the son of Lieutenant Holder, who was the principal investigator on this. And we've been in contact, and Ray's been in contact with his son, who has verified all of this. So these internal memos have some interesting things. It's pretty much talking about everything we talked about. Lonnie got within, it was closer than 200 feet. There's some inaccuracies in here because they correct things later. Let's see. Fly off in the southwest. Southwest is, you know, the wind was coming from the opposite direction, so this thing definitely flew into the wind. Sped up to over 100 miles an hour. This is interesting because this is an inverted V with a line through it, but what that is this struts had a wedge-shaped bottom with a rectangular top. And a wedge-shaped bottom, this is a cross-section of how this thing embedded into the soil. It's not related to this symbol. But nobody's ever seen this. So this is the wedge, this is the soil that's pushed off around it, and that's the level of the soil. That's the shape of these struts. And they were considerably, this is a heavy craft because it pushed up dirt around it. Points to bring out, 7 to 8 people witnessed the imprints of scorched markings. Captain Holder arrived a half hour after the event. He took photos. We never heard about those, but the film is not developed, and I'm sure that film didn't get developed either. This is interesting. I wasn't going to bring this up, but this is in the files. I've never seen this before. Zamora stated at first that it seemed to him that there was something inside of object trying to get out. Now, he saw 2 creatures, but we have this statement too. He really, after the first initial interviews, he stopped talking about the things in white coveralls because he was getting a lot of grief about it. He didn't want to bring it up anymore. And it's right here. Now will not say for fear of people laughing at him. Man is not well educated. I don't know why he wrote that in there. Lonnie was a pretty sharp guy. Zamora was pester quite a bit and badly misquoted, and that's what we're trying to clear up here. Dr. Hynek stated that Zamora was incapable of a hoax. This was a real down-to-earth guy. He went to his deathbed talking about this. They speculate complete hallucination. That wouldn't explain the imprints. Number 2, we have no idea what happened there, but he must have fallen asleep or gone to the bathroom.
Let's just go to 3.
Helicopter of some sort. Helicopter doesn't leave these kind of markings, like a cattle brand. Went out to check the site April 29th, that's 5 days after. Stated the original scene had been trampled. The tourists showed up and they did trample the scene and picked up things and took some things off. So that's an example of some of the memos we have that nobody's ever seen before. You're probably seeing this for the first time if you haven't seen, it was posted on UFO Chronicles. Now we're getting to some interesting evidence that came up. This is the dynamite shack in the area. When Lonnie heard this, a lot of other people, witnesses, heard the roar of the craft. They thought the dynamite shack had exploded. There were a couple of women in the building that were on the wrong side. They heard the explosion, but they were on the wrong side to see the craft. Other people said they heard a loud boom at this time. What happened is Ray was asked by somebody, and this is 50 years after the event, about 2006, somewhere around, yeah. Somebody said, well, who owned that dynamite shack? So Ray's going through his negatives, blows this thing up to see the lettering here, and he decides that he's got some other photos. Why don't I blow those up also and see what's in them? Now, this is a picture that there's a blow up of that Tony and I have seen. We cannot show you, and this is something that's going to really put this case back out in the open.
This is the negative also that he found along with the dynamite shack.
Yeah, this was one of the negatives that when he blew up the dynamite shack, he said, let me blow this up. Okay, Wednesday, Dr. Alan J. Hynek, right here, is shown photographing direction from which the object approached while Zamora, off-duty and in plain clothes here, bends down to help Sergeant Chavez dig a reconstruction of the landing gear, a reconstruction because the ground had been trampled. New Mexico State Police Sam Chavez reconstructs the southwest landing gear for Huntington Stanford. Now what's interesting is this is like a scientific experiment. When you do a scientific experiment, you want it to be repeatable. So Hynek's taken a photo with, unfortunately, a Polaroid at the same time that Ray used an Argus C3 35mm with a 50mm lens. Ray has some lenses that are huge. And
1,000 millimeters.
1,000 millimeters. Back in the day, this was pretty good technology. So the picture that Ray took has a lot of detail you can pull out of it. What we're looking for is Hynek's photo. We're not sure we can pull out. But what we're gonna concentrate on is right here. When Ray blew this picture up, and this is pretty far in the distance, there were 4 objects in the air. 2 large disc-shaped objects. To the left is an egg-shaped object. To the right is an egg-shaped object where you can see 3 landing struts coming out. We've seen this picture. We can't show it because Ray hasn't allowed it yet. When we do get Ray to allow it, hopefully next year, we're going to show that there is an actual photo of the craft exactly as Zamora described it. And it's pretty far in the distance, but because of the visual acuity of Ray's photograph and the camera he was using, it's not a smudge, it's not retouched, it's a blow up. It shows 3 of the landing gear, the egg-shaped craft, a circle of white, which might be the propulsion unit, and this is pretty much going to put to rest the hoax theories because these things were in the area. And the police officer said they saw them before and after, and they speculated that out here in the mountains they maybe had a base or there were a lot of them out there because there are 4 objects in this picture. So what could this have been? Is this the end? Could it have been alien? It's hard to say. You don't have the evidence yet. But this is still going to be one of the most important cases in ufology because once we are able to release the Hynek interview with Ray where he talks about all this and verifies it, and Ray releases this picture, and we're also doing slices of one of the rocks that has melted crystals, which can only be melted by certainly high temperatures because of the type of rocks they are. If you don't know anything about Ray, he's a famous dinosaur hunter too. He's found dinosaur prints that are in the Smithsonian. So this guy has a great eye for detail. And he has the rock, it's still being analyzed, the picture's gonna be analyzed, this is all gonna come out, and this thing is gonna go around the world again as another look at this case as we're doing now. We do have Ray's book in the back. We're selling these for Ray. They're $60, but these are out-of-print books, the only copy. They were copied in all the other countries illegally. Ray never got a penny for it. The books are $150 to $300 on eBay, unsigned in bad condition. We have mint condition books signed by Ray. They're $60 a piece. We're doing this for Ray. He found a box in his house where
Some
they were
of them were water
okay.
damaged. We got the chance to hand pick.
We handpicked the best ones. Has this photo in it that has the craft in it. You know, Ray 77, there's not many copies of this book left. I can't believe some people are buying them and reselling them on eBay, but you know, this is a collector's item. This is something to have. We have them. We made some hats with a symbol on it, which are great collector's items, but hopefully we've been able to clarify a little bit of this for you, put some of the hoaxes to rest, and give you a good idea that this is a close encounter of the third kind of, I would never say alien, time traveling, interdimensional, but it could be time traveling interdimensional ETs. You know, you just don't know what this is.
Aliens, but
It's aliens. You know, it probably wasn't a technology that was built by any military on this planet.
Any questions?
Any questions? Sure.
Yeah, at first you show Zamora, and he's pointing out where this craft landed, and he goes into all the details.
Right.
Then you show this picture with Zamora and JL and Hynek, and you say off in the distance the craft appears again.
Right. This was
Is that just coincidence? What?
It was 120 days later. Ray seems to be an attractor. I mean, he's taken a lot of pictures of what look to be real objects in the sky, but it's almost like, hey, you missed this the first time, we're gonna pop into this photo for you. But Lonnie, he said, where was the approach from? Lonnie pointed it out. Hynek and him turned.
And Chavez at the same time.
And Chavez, and they took a picture. And Ray, when he just blew the picture up, he saw, and his author, he said, actually saw what he thought were airplanes in the original photos and smudged them out for the book.
That's why I didn't see him for 50 years.
Right, so he didn't see them. He didn't know they were there. So 50 years later, when somebody asked about the dynamite shack, who owned it, he blew it up, and sure enough, well, we've seen this. It's not a fake. It's not a reconstruction. This is old 35 millimeter film. On the negative is the craft with 3 struts out.
So he returns, Zamora returns to the site with JL and Hynek
They all
just
return.
to look at the site.
Exactly.
And he takes this picture, and then later on, by blowing it up, you see.
Right, Ray took the
craft had
picture.
returned again.
Yeah, and if we could find Hynek's picture, we would have parallax, you know, 2 different camera's taking a picture, you get parallax. And that thing's out there somewhere. We're still looking for it. If anybody has any leads on that, we'd certainly like to see it. But it's a Polaroid. Might not be able to get as much data out of it. But there's clearly 4 objects in the sky. One of them is huge. So I'm not saying it's a bigger ship that discharged these smaller ships. And it's funny because the eggs are tilted. And one thing we've learned for real UFO pictures, they don't fly straight. They tilt because they're not using aerodynamics usually.
You mentioned the beam.
Well, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, but yeah, you're talking about technology that we have no idea how to operate. So it could be using compressed time, could be surroundings, could be manipulating gravity. If it's manipulating gravity, they don't need to. The saucers have been seen flying like this.
Mentioned Chris Lambert's book.
Yeah, there's a book called X Descending by Chris Lambright. He did a really good job of talking about the Paul Benowitz case and Ray Stanford, where a gentleman visited Ray's house. He's a famous doctor, Dr. Leif Morabay. Leif Morabay. He did he visited Ray and watched one of Ray's footage and told Ray that he had just done given him a breakthrough propulsion idea. And then he went out and wrote a paper where he proved in the lab from Ray's video that these things can shoot a plasma beam ahead of them that creates a vacuum in space, thus kind of pulling them through where they don't displace air, and that's why when they move really fast, there's no sound barrier being broken. It's called the air spike. You can look it up. The guy has also developed a thing with a foil that you hit it with a laser and it can travel forever through space. It's the same guy. He won't ever say that, but he was at Ray's house. He watched this film. The film was 3 minutes long. You watched it for 2 hours. And he said, you've just given the United States government a breakthrough in propulsion technology. So Ray finds things, he's filmed things. He was just lucky to blow this picture up to see this, the object in it. And we're gonna get him to release it one of these days. It's just, he can be tough to deal with. He's a great guy, he's a really smart guy. He's the only guy that ever found armored dinosaur footprints in the Beltway on a path at Goddard Space Center where people have been walking for a long time and they've been digging up stuff and putting parking lots in there. There's a plate of 4 different types of dinosaurs that they found that they're now preserving at Goddard, and they just gave Ray a replica of it for $40,000 that's in his basement that we saw recently. So, any other questions? Sure.
That soundtrack that you mocked up, was that confirmed as actual, that's what it sounded like?
It was pretty close. We used the space shuttle for loud noise.
Did Lonnie Zamora himself say, yes, that's what it sounded like?
It was a loud roar. We were just trying to approximate it. We have no idea what it actually sounded like.
So he didn't listen to it and say, oh, that's what it sounded
No,
like?
he passed, I believe, in '96. But he always described it as a loud roar. When he hit the dirt as his Army training, he thought that the thing was going to blow up. The second sound, the oscillating sound, that's a phaser from Star Trek.
He died in '96? I thought he just died 2-3 years ago.
No, I think his wife did. What's interesting is, and I forgot to mention this, when Ray wrote the eulogy for Lonnie after he passed away, when did he die? Wasn't it '96?
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, but anyway, before Lonnie Zamora died, his daughter kept asking him about what really happened, what was going on, and he had a copy of Ray's book, and he pointed to his daughter and pointed to Ray's. Okay, 2009. Sorry, we were off. Yeah.
So he could have.
Yeah.
Somebody should have asked him, did it sound like this? No.
Yeah, it's probably out there somewhere, but when his daughter asked him about the event, Lonnie pointed to Ray's book and said that's the only one that got it right, and he was quoted as saying that. And his daughter has written a letter to Ray that he has stating that Ray's book was pretty much exactly as it happened. We did other research also, the Blue Book documents and the things we pulled out, we shared with Ray. Those all are still pointing to the same thing. This was a real event, it wasn't a hoax. There's some crazy theories out there, but I think we've done a decent job, hopefully, you think, of showing you that there's a lot more to this than people know.
Could you elaborate on the story that was really an elaborate prank by New Mexico Tech students attempting to embarrass a local cop who was known as harassment?
Yeah, that was
New Mexico Tech students?
that was what was his name? Basically, he wrote in a letter that this had to have been a prank by college students, and that's
What
what's.
class?
No, it wouldn't. It was I can't remember his name. But he wrote in a letter that this couldn't have happened like this. It had to have been a prank by college students. And when Ray heard about this, he called him up to debate him on the radio, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And he couldn't produce the college students. They said they filled a balloon or a plastic bag with fire and set it off, and there were no pyrotechnics at the site. There was no butane at the site. This thing flew against the wind. It was witnessed by about 11 witnesses altogether. It left indentations in the ground. Plus, Lonnie was on random patrol. How would they know where Lonnie was going to be at that time? How would they be able to set the stage for that? How would they fly it over his head and land it? There's just too many things, too many inconsistencies that show that, and this was a speculation. This isn't something he said actually happened. He said it had to have been a hoax by college students.
Didn't he actually name the students?
No. Nobody came forward and said they were part of that, and he wouldn't talk about it. He won't talk about it anymore. Ray wanted to debate him, and he wouldn't step up to the plate. John.
Would a college craft have been radioactive?
Yeah. I mean, you have radioactivity, you have, this thing was heavy, a balloon wouldn't put indentations, wouldn't break a rock in half, wouldn't leave metal shards that Goddard wouldn't return, wouldn't have damaged the film. They were investigating this for years. They really wanted to explain it. They wanted to find a black project that explained this. They never did. Hector Quintanilla, who didn't believe in anything, said, you know, this is the one case that really has got me baffled. And there were 701 cases that were unknown. This is probably one of the top ones.
You might have covered this on the bathroom, but what's Ray's reasoning or justification for not releasing this photo?
Ray's been attacked a lot because of some of the things he wrote in the past that he now knows that he was just kind of out there. But Ray feels like right now if he releases it, everybody's going to call it a hoax and this and that. And we're trying to say, look, we'll analyze it. We'll have somebody the top in their field that doesn't know anything about UFOs, bring the photo to him, have him blow it up, and just say, tell us what you see. But Ray's worried about, you know, he's been attacked a lot. He doesn't really, he's not a public person anymore that much. It's hard to get him out of the house to speak. But he's just tired of it. He knows that people are going to attack him about that, and he's just done with that. He knows what happened, he believes what happened, but we're going to get it out there. And we're not going to charge, we're not going to fly to New Mexico and charge you $20 for an online a la Roswell slide to see the photo and rip everybody off. We just want to get the photo and put it out there.
It seems pretty important. It's almost worth the...
It's extremely important. Martin Willis on the Paracast, Dark Matter Radio, saw it, and that's when Ray talked about it. We were all on this radio show at the same time, and Ray blurted it out. We're like, well, Ray talked about it. Can we talk about it now? And Ray said, you can talk about it, you just can't show the picture.
And in mentioning it, just that one radio show, there's a blog that went viral, just people flaming left and right, and Ben was every day was just battling with these people, and I was like, I can't.
I give as good as I get.
As much harassment as talking about
just
it.
Talking about it.
Yeah, just the reaction of the podcast and the way people reacted. There's no way you could blow that up. It would be a smudge. What kind of camera? What, you know, I'm like, oh my God. Just from that alone, there was so much flack that I understand why Ray hadn't released it. So I appreciate it, guys. Huh? Sure.
One more.
Okay, so the dynamite shack, was that totally incidental to the story?
Yeah, the thing flew over that direction, so they were checking for magnetic readings to see if it had been magnetized, and there was some anomalies there. But that was key to the story because a lot of people, when they heard the roar, thought that shack had exploded. So and it's real near the site. So it was a key piece because they thought that thing had blown up.
But was it just owned by a local person?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Hope you enjoyed it.